The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung open with authority as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawk Morrison stepped into the marble-floored lobby. Her desert camouflage uniform was crisp and pressed, the Navy SEAL trident gleaming gold on her chest. Combat boots echoed against the polished stone as she moved with the measured stride of someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. She ignored the stares from lawyers in expensive suits and courthouse staff who whispered behind their hands. Her tactical watch showed 800 hours. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 8:30. Plenty of time to find the right courtroom and prepare for what would likely be the most important battle of her life. Sarah had faced down terrorists in Afghanistan, survived a helicopter crash in Syria, and led rescue missions in hostile territory. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. Walking into a civilian courtroom to fight for the custody of her 8-year-old daughter, Emma felt more terrifying than any combat zone. The elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, revealing a long corridor lined with courtroom entrances. Room 312 was halfway down the hall. Through the glass panels in the doors, Sarah could see people already gathering inside. Her stomach tightened when she spotted 2 familiar figures in the gallery. Her father, retired Colonel James Morrison, sat ramrod straight in his dress blue uniform, his face wearing the same disapproving expression she remembered from childhood. His gray mustache twitched as he checked his watch with military precision. Beside him, her mother Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her designer dress and pearls a stark contrast to her daughter's combat uniform. The moment Sarah entered the courtroom, her father's eyes fixed on her with obvious disdain. He leaned over to whisper something to Patricia, who shook her head slowly, her shoulders sagging with what looked like resignation or embarrassment. Sarah had expected this reaction. To them, she was still the rebellious daughter who had chosen the Navy over the Army, who had insisted on pursuing the most dangerous military career possible. "Commander Morrison," a young woman in a navy blue suit approached with a briefcase in hand. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, your attorney. We need to review a few things before the hearing begins." Sarah nodded, following Jennifer to a small conference room adjacent to the main courtroom. The space was cramped and sterile, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. Jennifer spread files across the table with practiced efficiency. "Your ex-husband's legal team is aggressive," Jennifer began without preamble. "They're going to argue that your military career makes you an unfit parent. Multiple deployments, dangerous assignments, the irregular schedule. They'll paint a picture of an absent mother who puts military service above family responsibilities." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Emma has always been my priority. Every decision I've made has been with her future in mind." "I believe you, but we need to prove it to Judge Harrison. He's fair but conservative when it comes to custody cases. The fact that you're wearing your uniform today might work against us. Some might see it as grandstanding or an attempt to use your military service for sympathy. This uniform represents 13 years of honorable service to my country. I've earned the right to wear it with pride." Jennifer studied her client's face, nodding the steel in her green eyes. "I understand your perspective, but courtrooms operate differently than military operations. Sometimes strategic retreating is the smartest tactical move." Before Sarah could respond, a knock on the door interrupted them. A bailiff poked his head inside. "5 minutes until we begin, ladies." They gathered their materials and returned to the main courtroom. Sarah took her place at the defendant's table, directly across from where her ex-husband Michael sat with his own legal team. He wore an expensive charcoal suit and looked every inch the successful corporate executive he had become. His lawyer, Richard Blackwood, was one of the most expensive divorce attorneys in the state. Michael's eyes met Sarah's for a brief moment. There had been a time when those brown eyes had looked at her with love and admiration. Now they held only cold calculation. Their marriage had crumbled under the weight of her military career and his growing resentment of her frequent absences. The final blow had come when she volunteered for an extended deployment to Afghanistan just as Emma was starting kindergarten. All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus Harrison. The courtroom stood as Judge Harrison entered. He was a tall, thin man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His reputation for being thorough and impartial had made him one of the most respected family court judges in the district. "Please be seated. We are here today for the preliminary custody hearing in Morrison versus Morrison. Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" Richard Blackwood rose first. His opening statement was polished and devastating. He painted Sarah as a career military officer who had repeatedly chosen service over family, leaving her daughter for months at a time while deployed to dangerous locations around the world. He presented evidence of missed school events, canceled birthday parties, and bedtime stories delivered over video calls from forward operating bases. Your Honor, Lieutenant Commander Morrison may be a decorated war hero, but that doesn't automatically make her a suitable primary parent for an 8-year-old child. Emma needs stability, consistency, and a parent who will be physically present for the important moments of her childhood. My client can provide all of these things. When Jennifer rose to present Sarah's case, she emphasized her client's dedication to both family and country. She spoke of the financial security Sarah's military career provided, the valuable life lessons Emma learned from having a mother in uniform, and the strong bond between mother and daughter despite the challenges of military life. But Sarah could see skepticism in Judge Harrison's eyes. The civilian world often struggled to understand military families and the sacrifices they made. To many, her choice to deploy while Emma was young seemed selfish rather than patriotic. The first witness was Emma's school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez. Her testimony was damaging but honest. Emma had struggled academically during Sarah's last deployment, acting out in class and showing signs of anxiety when video calls with her mother were interrupted by mission requirements. Emma is a bright, loving child, but the uncertainty of when she'll next see her mother has created some behavioral challenges. She often asks other children if their mothers are coming home for dinner, as if she can't quite believe that most mothers are home every day. Michael's sister Kate testified next, describing herself as Emma's primary caregiver during Sarah's absences. She painted a picture of a little girl who cried herself to sleep during the first weeks of each deployment and who had to be coaxed into believing her mother would actually return home. Sarah loves Emma, but love isn't enough. Emma needs a parent who won't disappear for months at a time with minimal notice. She needs someone who can attend every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference without worrying about classified missions or deployment schedules. When it was time for Sarah to testify on her own behalf, she approached the witness stand with the same steady composure she had shown in congressional briefings and military tribunals. She was sworn in and took her seat, her uniform a stark contrast to the civilian clothes worn by everyone else in the courtroom. Jennifer's questions allowed Sarah to explain her perspective. She spoke about the financial stability her military career provided, ensuring Emma would never want for anything. She described the educational benefits that would guarantee Emma could attend any college in the country. She talked about the values she was instilling in her daughter: service, honor, courage, and commitment. My military service has given Emma opportunities that most children never have. She's lived on bases around the world, learned to speak 3 languages, and developed a global perspective that will serve her well in life. Yes, there have been sacrifices, but Emma understands that what I do makes the world safer for children like her. But under cross-examination, Richard Blackwood was merciless. He forced Sarah to admit that she had missed Emma's 7th birthday due to a classified mission. He made her acknowledge that she had been unable to comfort her daughter in person when Emma had nightmares after watching news coverage of military casualties. He presented evidence of teacher reports expressing concern about Emma's emotional state during deployments. Commander Morrison, you testified that your daughter understands your service. But isn't it true that last month, when you told her about your upcoming deployment to Somalia, she asked if you loved the Navy more than you loved her? Sarah's composure cracked slightly. She was upset. Children say things when they're emotional. Please answer the question. Did your 8-year-old daughter ask if you loved the Navy more than you loved her? Yes, but... Thank you, no further questions. The afternoon brought character witnesses for both sides. Sarah's commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, testified about her exceptional service record and the respect she commanded among her peers. He spoke of her courage under fire and her unwavering commitment to her team and mission. But when asked about the demands of her position, he was forced to acknowledge the reality of military life. Deployments could be extended with little notice. Emergency missions took priority over personal obligations. The nature of special operations work meant that communication with family was often limited or completely cut off for security reasons. Michael's witnesses painted him as the stable, reliable parent Emma needed. His boss testified about his flexible work schedule and his commitment to being present for his daughter. His mother spoke tearfully about how Emma flourished during the weeks she spent at their house while Sarah was deployed. As the day wore on, Sarah felt the weight of the proceedings settling on her shoulders. Every positive aspect of her military career seemed to be turned into evidence of her unsuitability as a primary parent. Her courage became recklessness. Her dedication became obsession. Her service to country became abandonment of family. During a brief recess, Sarah stepped outside for air. The courthouse steps were busy with lawyers and clients conducting hushed conversations. She found a quiet corner and called her best friend and fellow SEAL, Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos. "How's it going?" Maria asked without preamble. "About as well as expected. They're painting me as a war-obsessed mother who abandons her child to play soldier." "That's complete bullshit, and you know it." "Maybe, but it's effective bullshit. Emma's counselor testified that she has abandonment issues. How do I argue with that?" Maria was quiet for a moment. "Look, Hawk, we've been through hell together. I've seen you cry over missing Emma's first steps because we were stuck in that bunker in Kandahar. I've watched you turn down promotions that would have taken you away from her for too long. Anyone who knows you understands that Emma is your whole world. But the judge doesn't know me. He sees a uniform and assumes I'm just another military parent who puts mission before family. Then show him who you really are. Stop letting them control the narrative." Sarah returned to the courtroom with renewed determination, but the afternoon continued to go poorly. Michael's psychiatrist testified about the psychological impact of parental absence on children. Statistics were presented about military families and divorce rates. Expert witnesses discussed the importance of stability in a child's formative years. By the end of the day, Sarah felt like she was losing the war before she had really begun to fight. Judge Harrison announced that the hearing would continue the following morning, giving both sides time to prepare their closing arguments. As people filed out of the courtroom, Sarah's parents approached her table. Her father's face was stern, his military bearing unchanged by age. Patricia looked exhausted and conflicted. "Sarah," Colonel Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "This spectacle has gone on long enough. You're embarrassing yourself and the uniform you wear. Emma needs stability, not a mother who disappears into war zones at a moment's notice." "Dad, you of all people should understand. I understand duty and I understand sacrifice. What I don't understand is a mother who thinks she can have everything. You can't be a SEAL and a full-time parent. The sooner you accept that reality, the better off everyone will be." Patricia reached out to touch Sarah's arm. "Honey, maybe it's time to consider what's really best for Emma. Michael loves her, and he can give her the normal childhood you never had." Sarah pulled her arm away, her voice steady despite the emotion in her chest. "Emma is my daughter. I fought for this country for 13 years, and I'll fight for her for the rest of my life. I won't abandon her, and I won't let anyone convince me that my service makes me unworthy of being her mother." Her parents exchanged glances, and Patricia shook her head slowly, that same gesture of resignation Sarah had noticed when she first entered the courtroom. They walked away without another word, leaving Sarah standing alone in the empty courtroom. Jennifer gathered her files and briefcase. "We need to talk strategy for tomorrow. There are some things we can do to turn this around, but it's going to require some difficult decisions on your part." "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that might change the entire course of your military career." As they walked out together, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. She had always believed that she could balance her service with motherhood, that Emma would understand and even be proud of her mother's sacrifice. But the day's testimony had shown her how naive that belief might have been. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. Sarah looked up at the flag flying at full staff and felt the weight of 13 years in uniform pressing down on her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight in a war she was no longer certain she could win. The drive home took her through the base where she had served for the past 3 years. The guard at the gate snapped a crisp salute when he recognized her vehicle. Young sailors stood at attention as her car passed. These men and women looked up to her, depended on her leadership, trusted her with their lives. But in a few hours, she would have to choose between two callings: the country she had sworn to serve and the daughter she had sworn to protect. For the first time in her military career, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Morrison wasn't sure which mission would ultimately prove more important. Sarah arrived at her apartment complex as darkness settled over the city. The building was typical military housing, functional, clean, but lacking the warmth of a real home. She climbed the stairs to the third floor, her boots echoing in the empty stairwell. Each step felt heavier than the last. The apartment was quiet when she entered. Too quiet. Emma's artwork still covered the refrigerator, her backpack sat by the door where she always dropped it after school, and her favorite stuffed dolphin waited patiently on the couch. But Emma herself was at Michael's house for the week, part of the temporary custody arrangement put in place when the divorce proceedings began. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot that had been sitting since morning and sat at the small kitchen table where she and Emma ate breakfast together on the mornings when she was home. The events of the day played through her mind like a mission debrief, each detail analyzed for tactical advantages and critical failures. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. "Mommy, Daddy says you're in court because you want to see me more. Is that true? I miss you." Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her parents are fighting over her future? How do you tell a child that some people think your career makes you an unfit mother? She typed back, "Yes, sweetheart, Mommy misses you too. I'll see you soon, sleep tight." The response came quickly. "I drew you a picture of us swimming with dolphins. Daddy says maybe we can go to Sea World when this is over. Love you, Mommy." Sarah set the phone down and stared at the empty chair where Emma usually sat, animatedly describing her day at school while picking the raisins out of her cereal. The silence was deafening. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah opened it to find Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Thompson standing in the hallway. Jake had been her mentor since she joined the teams, a 25-year veteran who had guided her through the toughest moments of her career. "Figured you might want some company," Jake said, holding up a six-pack of beer and a bag of takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant. Sarah stepped aside to let him in. Jake was one of the few people who knew the full story of her marriage and divorce. He had been there when she received the call about Michael filing for custody, had watched her struggle to balance her duties as a SEAL with her responsibilities as a mother. They sat at the kitchen table, eating pad thai and drinking beer while Sarah recounted the day's events. Jake listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head at particularly damaging testimony. "So what's your lawyer's plan for tomorrow?" he asked when she finished. "She wants me to consider early retirement. Says it would show Judge Harrison that I'm serious about putting Emma first. She thinks it might be the only way to convince him that I can provide the stability he's looking for." Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying the beer bottle in his hands. 13 years of service, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, counterterrorism operations in 12 countries. You've got commendations that would make a general jealous. You really willing to walk away from all that? For Emma, in a heartbeat. But what if I retire and still lose custody? Then I've given up everything for nothing. Or what if you keep fighting this battle in uniform and lose Emma anyway? Then you've lost everything that really matters. Sarah knew he was right, but the thought of leaving the teams felt like tearing out part of her soul. The Navy SEALs had been her identity for over a decade. They had shaped her into the woman she was today, strong, capable, fearless. Without the uniform, who would she be? "Remember when you first showed up at basic underwater demolition training?" Jake asked, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. 5'6", 130 pounds soaking wet, and attitude for days. Half the instructors figured you'd wash out in the first week. "Gee, thanks for the confidence. But you didn't quit. Even when that jackass Peterson tried to make your life miserable because he didn't think women belonged in the teams. Even when you dislocated your shoulder during Hell Week and the medics wanted to pull you from training. You gritted your teeth and pushed through because you believed you belonged here." Sarah nodded, remembering those brutal months of training that had nearly broken her body and spirit. She had been one of only 3 women to attempt SEAL training that year, and the only one to successfully complete it. "So what's different now?" Jake continued. "You're still that same stubborn, determined woman who refused to quit when everyone expected you to fail. Emma is just another mission, and you don't leave team members behind." But what if the mission parameters have changed? What if the best way to protect Emma is to step back rather than push forward? Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "That's a call only you can make. But I've seen you in combat, Sarah. I've watched you lead men and women through situations that would terrify experienced operators. You don't back down from fights that matter." They talked until well past midnight, examining the situation from every possible angle. Jake shared stories of other military parents who had faced similar custody battles, some who had won by adapting their careers, others who had lost everything trying to have it all. As Jake prepared to leave, he turned back to Sarah. "Whatever you decide tomorrow, the teams will respect your choice. You've earned that much, but don't let anyone convince you that your service makes you less of a mother. Emma needs to see that women can be strong, can serve their country, can make difficult choices and live with the consequences." After he left, Sarah stood at her living room window looking out at the naval base in the distance. Lights twinkled from buildings where dedicated men and women worked around the clock to keep the country safe. Somewhere out there, SEAL teams were preparing for missions, depending on the skills and leadership she had helped develop. She thought about the young female sailors who looked up to her, who saw in her uniform the possibility that they too could break barriers and excel in traditionally male-dominated fields. If she walked away now, what message would that send? That family and career were incompatible for women in the military, that eventually they would have to choose. But then she thought about Emma's question, "Do you love the Navy more than you love me?" The innocent words of a child who just wanted her mother to come home. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began researching. She read everything she could find about military custody cases, looking for precedents and successful strategies. She studied Judge Harrison's previous rulings, trying to understand his judicial philosophy and decision-making patterns. What she found was not encouraging. Judge Harrison had a clear preference for stability in custody arrangements. He rarely awarded primary custody to parents with unpredictable schedules or high-stress careers. In the few military cases she could find, he had consistently ruled in favor of the civilian parent unless there were extraordinary circumstances. Around 3 in the morning, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Jennifer Walsh's number. "I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep," Jennifer said without preamble. "I've been thinking about our conversation today, and I want to propose a different strategy." "I'm listening." "What if we don't focus on defending your military career? What if we go on the offensive instead?" Sarah sat up straighter. "Explain." "Michael's team is portraying him as the perfect father, but every perfect facade has cracks. I've been digging into his background, and there are some interesting things about his travel schedule and work priorities that might surprise Judge Harrison." Jennifer explained that Michael's corporate position required extensive travel, often with little advance notice. In the past year, he had missed several important events in Emma's life due to business trips. His own family members had made comments about his workaholic tendencies and his habit of taking business calls during family gatherings. "The difference is that when you're deployed, everyone knows exactly where you are and why you can't come home. When Michael travels for business, it's just as disruptive to Emma's life, but it gets framed as responsible breadwinning rather than parental abandonment." Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time since the hearing began. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to trust me and be willing to get aggressive. We're going to challenge their narrative that military service equals bad parenting, and we're going to force Michael to defend his own choices as a parent." They talked strategy until sunrise, developing an approach that would shift the focus from Sarah's absences to the quality of care Emma received from both parents. Jennifer had uncovered evidence that Michael frequently left Emma with babysitters during his business trips, while Sarah had always arranged for Emma to stay with trusted military families who understood the unique challenges of service life. When morning came, Sarah dressed in her civilian clothes for the first time since the hearing began. Jennifer had convinced her that the uniform was creating an unnecessary barrier with the judge. Today, she would appear as Emma's mother first and a Navy SEAL second. The courthouse was busy with the typical morning rush of lawyers, clients, and court personnel. Sarah met Jennifer in the lobby, nodding the surprised looks from people who had seen her in uniform the previous day. Without the military bearing and crisp dress blues, she looked younger, more approachable, more like someone's mother. "Are you ready for this?" Jennifer asked as they rode the elevator to the 3rd floor. "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom was packed when they entered. Sarah's parents sat in the same seats they had occupied the day before, her father's expression unreadable behind his stoic military mask. Michael and his legal team were already at their table, reviewing notes and preparing for what they clearly expected to be their victory day. Judge Harrison entered promptly at 9, and the hearing resumed with Jennifer calling Sarah's first witness, Captain Martinez, the commanding officer of the base child care center. Lieutenant Commander Morrison has been using our services for 3 years, Captain Martinez testified. In that time, Emma has thrived in our environment. She's academically advanced, socially well-adjusted, and clearly benefits from the structured, disciplined approach that characterizes military families. Under cross-examination, Richard Blackwood tried to portray the military childcare system as cold and institutional, but Captain Martinez defended it passionately. Our teachers are trained to work with military children who face unique challenges. They understand deployment cycles, help children cope with parental absences, and provide stability when service members are called away. Emma Morrison has never lacked for attention or care when her mother was serving her country. The next witness was Dr. Angela Foster, a child psychologist who specialized in military families. Her testimony directly contradicted much of what Michael's experts had said about the psychological impact of military life on children. Children of service members often develop exceptional resilience, adaptability, and maturity, Dr. Foster explained. They learn to value service above self, to cope with uncertainty, and to appreciate family time in ways that other children don't. Emma Morrison shows all the positive characteristics I associate with military children. When Jennifer asked about Emma's behavioral issues during deployments, Dr. Foster provided crucial context. It's normal for children to experience anxiety when separated from a parent, regardless of the reason for separation. What matters is how the child copes and whether they have strong support systems. Emma has learned healthy coping mechanisms and maintains a strong bond with her mother despite the challenges of military life. Richard Blackwood's cross-examination was brutal, but Dr. Foster held her ground. She had worked with hundreds of military families and understood the nuances that civilian experts often missed. The morning's biggest surprise came when Jennifer called Michael Morrison to the witness stand. Richard Blackwood objected strenuously, arguing that his client was not required to testify during the preliminary hearing, but Judge Harrison allowed it. Under Jennifer's questioning, a different picture of Michael began to emerge. Yes, he was successful in his corporate career, but that success came at a cost. He regularly worked 60-hour weeks, traveled extensively for business, and often brought work home with him. Emma's own journal entries, subpoenaed from her school counselor, revealed that she sometimes felt ignored when Michael spent evening phone calls discussing business deals. Mr. Morrison, is it true that you missed Emma's school Christmas play last December because of a business trip to Singapore? Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That was an important client meeting. I couldn't reschedule it. But you could have attended the play via video conference, the same way my client has participated in Emma's activities during deployments, correct? It's not the same thing. Why not? Absence is absence, isn't it? Jennifer pressed harder, revealing that Michael had hired a series of nannies to care for Emma during his business trips, while Sarah had always ensured that Emma stayed with people she knew and trusted. She brought up instances where Michael had forgotten school events or important appointments because of work pressures. The courtroom grew tense as Jennifer painted a picture of a father who was present physically, but often absent emotionally. Michael's own family members had made comments about his priorities, suggesting that his pursuit of career advancement sometimes came at Emma's expense. During the lunch recess, Sarah noticed her parents sitting alone in the courthouse cafeteria. Her father was picking at a sandwich while Patricia stared out the window, lost in thought. Against her better judgment, Sarah approached their table. "Mind if I sit down?" Colonel Morrison looked up, his expression softening slightly. "Your lawyer is quite aggressive. She's certainly turning the tables on Michael." "She's showing the truth. Everyone wants to focus on my deployments, but Michael hasn't exactly been Father of the Year either." Patricia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about fighting for Emma. And I remember when you were little, how determined you were to prove yourself. Your father and I thought military service would be a phase, something you'd outgrow when you started a family." Colonel Morrison frowned. "Patricia." "No, James, let me say this. she turned back to Sarah. "We were wrong to think you couldn't have both. Watching you in that courtroom, seeing how much you love Emma, I realized that maybe we've been judging you by outdated standards." Sarah felt tears threatening but forced them back. This wasn't the time for emotional breakdowns. "Emma needs you," Patricia continued. "She needs to see that her mother is strong enough to fight for what matters. We should have supported you from the beginning instead of questioning your choices." Colonel Morrison nodded slowly. "Your mother is right. I've seen plenty of military families succeed despite the challenges. I was projecting my own regrets onto your situation." The afternoon session began with character witnesses for Sarah. Fellow SEAL team members testified about her dedication and professionalism. Emma's teachers spoke about the pride she took in her mother's service and how well she had adapted to the demands of military life. The most powerful testimony came from Chief Petty Officer Lisa Chen, a single mother who had served under Sarah's command. She described how Sarah had mentored her through a difficult divorce while deployed, helping her maintain custody of her own children despite the challenges of military life. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison taught me that being a good mother and a good sailor aren't mutually exclusive. She showed me how to balance both responsibilities without compromising either. Emma is lucky to have a mother who models strength, courage, and service." As the day progressed, the momentum began to shift. Judge Harrison asked pointed questions about Michael's travel schedule and work priorities. He seemed particularly interested in the nanny arrangements and the lack of extended family support in Michael's custody plan. When court adjourned for the day, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since the hearing began. Jennifer had successfully challenged the narrative that military service automatically disqualified someone from being a good parent. But as they gathered their materials, Richard Blackwood approached with a grim smile. "Enjoy today's small victory, counselor. Tomorrow we present our final witnesses, and I guarantee Judge Harrison will see the truth about military families and their priorities." Sarah watched Michael leave the courtroom, his confident stride unchanged despite the day's revelations. He still believed he would win, and with good reason. Judges rarely awarded primary custody to parents with unpredictable schedules, regardless of their other qualifications. Outside the courthouse, Sarah's parents waited by her car. Colonel Morrison stood at attention, while Patricia clutched her purse with white-knuckled hands. "Sarah," her father began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of military authority. "Your mother and I have been talking. If you're willing to accept it, we'd like to testify on your behalf tomorrow." Sarah stared at them in shock. "You want to testify for me?" "We want to tell Judge Harrison what kind of woman you really are," Patricia said. "What kind of mother you've become despite all the challenges. What kind of legacy you're creating for Emma." For the first time in days, Sarah felt tears spilling down her cheeks. Her parents had never fully supported her military career, had always questioned her choices, had made her feel like she was failing as both a soldier and a mother. "Are you sure?" Michael's lawyer will ask tough questions. He'll try to make you admit that military life is harmful to children. Colonel Morrison straightened his shoulders. "Let him try. I've been a military parent and a military child. I know the truth about service families, and it's time someone told that truth in court." As her parents walked away, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling that she wasn't fighting this battle alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time, she had allies who understood both sides of her life. The drive home took her past the elementary school where Emma was enrolled. Children were playing on the playground during after-school care, their laughter carrying across the parking lot. Sarah pulled over and watched them for a few minutes, thinking about all the playground moments she had missed, all the bedtime stories delivered by video call, all the hugs that had been delayed by mission requirements. But she also thought about the values she was teaching Emma through her service, the example she was setting of a woman who could excel in any field she chose, the pride in Emma's voice when she told her classmates that her mother was a Navy SEAL. Tomorrow would determine whether those lessons would continue or whether Emma would learn a different lesson. That society still expected women to choose between family and career, that even in the 21st century, some battles were too difficult to win. Sarah started the car and drove home, her mind already preparing for the final day of testimony. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with the same courage and determination that had carried her through Hell Week, through combat zones, through every challenge the Navy had thrown at her. The only difference was that this time, the stakes were infinitely higher. The third day of the custody hearing dawned gray and overcast, with thick clouds threatening rain. Sarah arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, her stomach tight with nervous energy. Today would likely determine Emma's future and possibly her own. Jennifer was already waiting in the lobby, reviewing notes and checking her phone for last-minute updates. She looked up when Sarah approached, offering a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ready for the final push?" Jennifer asked. "As ready as I'll ever be. Any word on whether my parents will actually show up?" "Your father called 20 minutes ago. They're on their way. Are you sure you want them to testify? Once they're on that stand, Michael's lawyer will try to use their testimony against us." Sarah nodded. "They know the risks. For the first time in my career, they're actually supporting me instead of questioning every decision I make." They made their way to the courtroom, which was already filling with observers. Sarah noticed several of her fellow SEAL team members in the gallery, still in their dress uniforms despite the early hour. Master Chief Thompson caught her eye and nodded encouragingly. Michael was at his table with Richard Blackwood, looking confident and well-rested. He wore another expensive suit and spoke quietly with his lawyer, occasionally glancing toward Sarah's table with what might have been pity. Judge Harrison entered promptly at 9, and the final day of testimony began with Richard Blackwood calling his expert witness, Dr. Robert Sterling, a child psychologist who specialized in custody evaluations. Dr. Sterling's credentials were impressive, and his testimony was devastating. He had reviewed Emma's school records, interviewed her teachers, and conducted a psychological evaluation of the child herself. His conclusions painted Sarah's military career as fundamentally incompatible with effective parenting. "Children require consistency and predictability for healthy emotional development," Dr. Sterling explained to the court. "Emma Morrison shows clear signs of attachment anxiety related to her mother's unpredictable schedule and frequent absences. While she loves her mother, she has developed coping mechanisms that suggest underlying stress." He presented Emma's drawings from therapy sessions, pictures of herself, standing alone, while a tiny figure in the distance wore what looked like a military uniform. He described her habit of checking her phone obsessively for messages from her mother during deployments, and her tendency to withdraw emotionally when departure dates approached. "In my professional opinion, Emma would benefit significantly from the stability that full-time custody with her father would provide. Mr. Morrison's work schedule, while demanding, is predictable. Emma would know where he is when he'll be home, and that he won't disappear for months at a time." Jennifer's cross-examination was aggressive but respectful. She challenged Dr. Sterling's assumptions about military families and questioned whether he had adequately considered the positive aspects of Sarah's influence on Emma. "Dr. Sterling, did you interview any other military children as part of your evaluation?" "I focused specifically on Emma Morrison's case." "So you have no baseline for comparison with other children in similar circumstances?" "That wasn't deemed necessary for this evaluation." "Did you consider that Emma's anxiety might stem from the uncertainty of the custody battle itself, rather than her mother's military service?" Dr. Sterling shifted uncomfortably. "All factors were considered, but the pattern of behavior predates the custody proceedings." Jennifer pressed harder, bringing up studies that showed military children often developed exceptional resilience and adaptability. She forced Dr. Sterling to admit that his recommendations were based more on theory than on empirical evidence about Emma's specific situation. The next witness was Michael's mother, Ellen Morrison. She was a small, elegantly dressed woman in her 70s who spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. Her testimony was emotionally charged and difficult to hear. "Emma is my only grandchild," Ellen began, her voice wavering slightly. "I've watched her struggle with her mother's absences since she was a baby. When Sarah deploys, Emma comes to stay with us, and it breaks my heart to see her counting days on a calendar, waiting for Mommy to come home." Ellen described Christmas mornings when Emma opened presents via video call because Sarah was overseas. She talked about school events where Emma was the only child whose mother appeared on a laptop screen instead of sitting in the auditorium. She painted a picture of a little girl who had learned to be strong because she had no choice. "I love my daughter-in-law," Ellen concluded. Sarah is a brave, dedicated woman who serves our country with honor. But Emma needs more than video calls and delayed hugs. She needs a parent who will be there for every scraped knee, every bad dream, every milestone moment. Jennifer's cross-examination revealed some uncomfortable truths about Ellen's perspective. Under questioning, it became clear that Ellen had never fully accepted Sarah's military career and had consistently undermined her decisions as a parent. "Mrs. Morrison, is it true that you told Emma her mother was playing war instead of taking care of her family?" Ellen's composure cracked slightly. "I may have said something to that effect during a difficult moment." "And did you tell Emma that real mothers don't leave their children for months at a time?" "Emma was crying, she missed her mother. I was trying to comfort her by teaching her that her mother's service was less important than traditional parenting roles." Richard Blackwood objected before Ellen could answer, but the damage was done. Judge Harrison made notes while Jennifer moved on to other questions that revealed Ellen's bias against military families. When court recessed for lunch, Sarah felt the familiar weight of judgment from civilians who couldn't understand the complexities of military life. Ellen Morrison loved Emma, but her testimony revealed the kind of thinking that made custody battles so difficult for service members. The afternoon session began with Jennifer calling Colonel Morrison to the witness stand. Sarah's father looked distinguished in his dress blue uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons earned over 3 decades of military service. As he was sworn in, Sarah held her breath. Jennifer's questions allowed Colonel Morrison to establish his credibility as both a military officer and a father. He spoke about his own challenges balancing service with family life, the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned. "Colonel Morrison, you've been married to a military spouse for 42 years and raised 2 children while serving your country. In your opinion, is it possible to be both an effective military officer and a good parent?" "Absolutely. It requires sacrifice, planning, and exceptional support systems, but it's entirely possible. Some of the finest parents I've known have been military officers." "What about your daughter specifically? How would you describe her as a mother?" Colonel Morrison's expression softened as he looked toward Sarah. "My daughter is the finest officer I've had the privilege of serving with, and an even better mother. She has faced challenges that would break lesser people, and she has never wavered in her commitment to either her duty or her child." He described watching Sarah juggle deployment preparations with Emma's bedtime routines, seeing her turn down promotions that would have required longer separations, and witnessing the fierce love she showed for her daughter despite the constraints of military life. Emma Morrison is fortunate to have a mother who models courage, integrity, and service. These are values that will serve her well throughout her life. Richard Blackwood's cross-examination was predictably aggressive. He forced Colonel Morrison to acknowledge the difficulties military children faced, the strain that deployments placed on families, and the reality that civilian parents could offer more stability. But Colonel Morrison had been through congressional hearings and Pentagon briefings. He remained calm under pressure and refused to be rattled by Blackwood's tactics. "Mr. Blackwood, are you suggesting that military personnel should be prohibited from having children, or just that they should automatically forfeit custody rights when they divorce?" "I'm suggesting that children's needs should come first. And I'm telling you that military children learn values that many civilian children never develop. They learn to appreciate time with family because they understand how precious it is. They develop independence, resilience, and a global perspective that serves them throughout their lives." The exchange continued for another 20 minutes, with Blackwood trying to break down Colonel Morrison's defense of military families. But the retired colonel had decades of experience defending his beliefs, and he never wavered in his support for Sarah. Patricia Morrison testified next, and her words carried even more weight because of her perspective as a military spouse and mother. She spoke about the challenges she had faced raising children while her husband deployed, the strength she had found in military communities, and the pride she felt watching her daughter excel in such a demanding career. "I worried about Sarah when she chose the SEALs," Patricia admitted. "Not because I doubted her ability, but because I knew how difficult it would be to balance that career with motherhood. But she has exceeded every expectation. Emma is a happy, confident child who adores her mother and understands that what Sarah does matters." Under cross-examination, Patricia acknowledged that military life was difficult for families, but she refused to concede that difficulty meant dysfunction. Mr. Blackwood, every family faces challenges. Military families face unique ones, but that doesn't make them inferior. Emma has learned lessons about sacrifice, service, and courage that many children never learn. Those lessons come from having a mother in uniform. The final witness of the day was Emma herself. Judge Harrison had decided that at 8 years old, she was mature enough to express her preferences, though he emphasized that her testimony would be just one factor in his decision. Emma entered the courtroom wearing a blue dress and clutching a small stuffed dolphin. She looked tiny in the witness chair, but her voice was clear and steady when she was sworn in. Jennifer's questions were gentle and age-appropriate. Emma talked about life with both her parents, describing the differences between their homes and routines. Her answers were honest and sometimes heartbreaking. "Do you miss your mommy when she goes away for work?" Jennifer asked. "Yes, but I understand why she has to go. Mommy protects people who can't protect themselves. She's like a superhero, but real." "What do you like about visiting your daddy?" "Daddy takes me to movies and we eat pizza and he helps me with homework. He's always home for dinner unless he has work trips." "And what do you like about time with your mommy?" Emma's face lit up. "Mommy tells the best stories about all the places she's been. She teaches me things like how to tie special knots and how to read maps. And when she comes home from deployment, she hugs me so tight it's like she's trying to make up for all the hugs we missed." Richard Blackwood's cross-examination was careful but probing. He asked Emma about the times she felt scared or lonely when her mother was away, about the video calls that were interrupted by military duties, about the uncertainty of deployment schedules. But Emma's answers revealed a maturity beyond her years. Yes, she missed her mother during deployments, but she was proud of what Sarah did. Yes, video calls sometimes got cut short, but that just made the eventual homecoming more special. Yes, she worried about her mother's safety, but she understood that important work sometimes involved danger. "Emma, if you could choose where to live, what would you choose?" Blackwood asked. Emma looked toward both her parents, her expression serious. "I want to live with both my mommy and daddy, but if I can't do that, I want to live wherever my family can still be a family." It was a child's answer, honest and uncomplicated. Judge Harrison made notes while Emma was escorted back to the gallery. Closing arguments began immediately afterward. Richard Blackwood spoke first, summarizing the case against Sarah with polished efficiency. He portrayed her as a dedicated military officer whose career demands were simply incompatible with the needs of an 8-year-old child. "Your Honor, this case isn't about whether Lieutenant Commander Morrison is a good person or even whether she loves her daughter. It's about what's best for Emma Morrison. A child shouldn't have to wonder whether her parent will be home for Christmas or miss her birthday because of classified missions." He emphasized the stability Michael could provide, the consistency of his schedule, and the support system available through his extended family. He painted a picture of a normal childhood where Emma would never have to explain why her mother couldn't attend school events or why she spent holidays with relatives instead of parents. Emma Morrison deserves a childhood where the most dangerous thing her parent faces is traffic on the way to soccer practice. She deserves bedtime stories in person, not over satellite phones from combat zones. She deserves a father who can promise to be there, not just hope to be there. Jennifer's closing argument was passionate and personal. She began by challenging the assumption that military families were somehow less valid than civilian ones. "Your Honor, Mr. Blackwood would have you believe that service to country disqualifies someone from being a good parent. By that logic, we should remove children from every military family, every police family, every family where a parent serves something larger than themselves." She walked the court through Sarah's actual record as a mother. The sacrifices she had made to minimize time away from Emma, the careful planning that went into every deployment, the network of trusted caregivers who ensured Emma was never alone or afraid. Emma Morrison doesn't just have a mother who loves her. She has a mother who shows her every day that women can be strong, capable, and dedicated to both family and purpose. She has a mother who models values that will serve Emma throughout her life. Jennifer addressed the concerns about stability and consistency by pointing out that Michael's own career involved significant travel and unpredictable demands. She argued that the real difference wasn't in the parents' availability, but in how society perceived their absences. When a military parent deploys, we call it duty. When a corporate executive travels for business, we call it ambition. But Emma experiences both absences the same way. The only difference is that her mother's absences serve a higher purpose. She concluded by asking Judge Harrison to consider what message his ruling would send to military families and to children like Emma who needed to see that their parents' service mattered. This decision will determine not just Emma's future, but whether we as a society value the sacrifices that military families make for all of us. Emma is proud of her mother's service. She shouldn't be punished for that pride. When the arguments concluded, Judge Harrison announced that he would take the case under advisement and issue his ruling within 1 week. The courtroom began to empty as people filed out in small groups, discussing the day's testimony in hushed voices. Sarah sat at the defense table, emotionally drained and physically exhausted. 3 days of testimony had revealed every aspect of her life, every choice she had made, every moment of doubt and strength she had experienced as both a SEAL and a mother. Jennifer gathered her files and offered what encouragement she could. "You did everything possible. Your parents' testimony was particularly powerful. Whatever Judge Harrison decides, he can't say you didn't fight for Emma." As they prepared to leave, Michael approached Sarah's table. His expression was unreadable, but he seemed less confident than he had at the beginning of the hearing. "Sarah, can we talk privately for a moment?" Jennifer started to object, but Sarah nodded toward the hallway. They stepped outside the courtroom, away from the lingering observers and court personnel. "This has been harder than I expected," Michael began. "Listening to Emma testify, hearing her talk about both of us, I don't think either of us realized how much this battle was affecting her." Sarah studied her ex-husband's face, looking for signs of manipulation or strategy, but he seemed genuinely troubled by what they had put their daughter through. "What are you saying, Michael?" "I'm saying maybe there's a better way to handle this. Maybe we don't have to wait for Judge Harrison to decide Emma's future for us." Before Sarah could respond, Michael's lawyer approached with an urgent expression. "We need to talk," Richard Blackwood said, pulling his client aside for a whispered conference. Sarah watched them from across the hallway, wondering if Michael's apparent change of heart was genuine or if this was another legal strategy. After 3 days of character assassination and emotional manipulation, she found it hard to trust anything that seemed too good to be true. But as she looked through the courtroom windows at the empty judge's bench where her fate would be decided, Sarah realized that the outcome of this battle might matter less than how she fought it. Emma had seen her mother stand up for herself, defend her choices, and refuse to back down when challenged. Whatever Judge Harrison decided, Emma would remember that her mother had fought for her with the same courage and determination she brought to every mission. Sometimes that was enough. The hallway was nearly empty when Sarah finally gathered her things and headed for the elevator. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she would go home and wait for a phone call from the little girl who still believed her mother was a superhero. Whether or not the legal system agreed remained to be seen. The week following the custody hearing passed slowly, each day feeling like an eternity as Sarah waited for Judge Harrison's decision. She tried to maintain her normal routine, reporting to base for training exercises and administrative duties, but her concentration was fractured. Every phone call might be the one that would determine Emma's future. On Tuesday morning, Sarah was reviewing mission reports in her office when Master Chief Thompson knocked on her door frame. His expression was serious, and he held a manila envelope that bore the seal of Naval Special Warfare Command. "You got a minute, Commander?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Sarah gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What's that about?" Jake sat down and placed the envelope on her desk. "Orders came down from NAVSBCWARCOM. There's a position opening up at the Naval War College in Newport. They want you to apply for the instructor slot." Sarah stared at the envelope without opening it. The Naval War College was prestigious, a career-enhancing assignment that would put her on track for Admiral stars. It was also shore duty, no deployments, no combat missions, no months away from Emma. "This is about the custody hearing, isn't it?" she asked. Jake nodded. "Word gets around. The brass knows what you're going through and they want to help. The job would keep you stateside, give you a normal schedule, and still advance your career. It's a good deal, Sarah. She opened the envelope and scanned the contents. The position was everything Jake had described, a chance to teach strategy and tactics to the next generation of naval officers while maintaining a stable home life. It was the perfect solution to her problems if she was willing to leave the teams. The application deadline is Friday, Jake continued. If you're interested, you need to move fast. Sarah set the papers aside and looked out her office window at the training compound where SEAL candidates were running obstacle courses. Some of those young men and women would eventually serve under her command, depending on her expertise and leadership to keep them alive in hostile territory. Leaving for a teaching position felt like abandoning her post. "What would you do?" she asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "I'd probably stay with the teams and fight for joint custody, but I'm not a single parent trying to prove I deserve to raise my daughter. That's a battle only you can decide how to fight." That evening, Sarah drove to Michael's house for her scheduled visit with Emma. The neighborhood was upscale and family-friendly, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained lawns. Children rode bicycles on sidewalks while their parents watched from front porches. It was the kind of stable, predictable environment that Judge Harrison probably envisioned when he thought about ideal childhoods. Emma ran out to meet her as soon as Sarah's car pulled into the driveway. She was wearing a soccer uniform and cleats, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that was already coming loose from practice. "Mommy, I scored 2 goals today," Emma announced, launching herself into Sarah's arms. Sarah held her daughter tightly, breathing in the scent of grass stains and children's shampoo. "Tell me all about it," she said, settling onto the front steps while Emma recounted every detail of the game. Michael appeared in the doorway, watching the reunion with an unreadable expression. He looked tired, older somehow than he had during the trial. The confident corporate executive had been replaced by a man who seemed to be questioning his own certainties. "Emma, go get your overnight bag," he said gently. "Your mom's probably hungry and wants to take you to dinner." As Emma disappeared into the house, Michael sat down beside Sarah on the steps. They had barely spoken since the trial ended, communication limited to logistics about Emma's schedule and pickup times. "I've been thinking about what you said in court," Michael began. "About Emma needing to see that women can be strong and serve something bigger than themselves." Sarah remained quiet, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "I married you because you were unlike anyone I'd ever met. You were fearless, driven, passionate about making a difference in the world. I fell in love with that strength." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "Somewhere along the way, I started seeing those same qualities as threats to our family instead of gifts." "Michael, let me finish. I convinced myself that your deployments were selfish choices, that you were putting your career ahead of our family. But watching Emma testify, hearing her talk about how proud she is of what you do, I realized I've been wrong." Emma emerged from the house carrying a small backpack decorated with dolphins. She hugged Michael goodbye and skipped towards Sarah's car, eager to begin their evening together. "We need to talk more about this," Michael said as Sarah stood to leave. "There might be another way to handle the custody situation." Sarah nodded, uncertain what to make of his apparent change of heart, but willing to listen if it meant finding a solution that was truly best for Emma. They drove to Emma's favorite restaurant, a family-friendly place with crayons on every table and servers who knew Emma's name. Over chicken nuggets and French fries, Emma chattered about school, her friends, and her plans for the weekend. "Mommy, are you still going to be a SEAL when I grow up?" Emma asked suddenly, looking up from her coloring sheet. The question caught Sarah off guard. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Some kids at school said their parents think you might have to choose between being a SEAL and being my mom. But that's silly, right? You can be both." Sarah felt her heart clench. Even at 8 years old, Emma was picking up on the adult conversations and tensions surrounding the custody battle. She deserved an honest answer, but how do you explain complex legal and social issues to a child? "What do you think?" Sarah asked carefully. "Do you think I can be both?" Emma considered this seriously. Her crayon paused halfway through coloring a purple dolphin. "I think you're the best mom and the best SEAL. You protect me and you protect other people too. That makes you super important. Even when I have to go away for work. Even then, because I know you're coming back, and when you do, you have the best stories." That night, after tucking Emma into bed at her apartment, Sarah sat at her kitchen table and stared at the Naval War College application. The position would solve her immediate problems. No more custody battles based on deployment schedules. No more agonizing choices between mission requirements and school events. She could give Emma the stable, predictable life that everyone seemed to think she needed. But she would also be giving up the work that had defined her for 13 years. The teams needed experienced leaders, especially women who could mentor the next generation of female special operators. Her skills and knowledge were hard-earned and not easily replaced. Her phone rang around 10 o'clock. Jennifer Walsh's name appeared on the caller ID. "I hope I'm not calling too late," Jennifer said. "I wanted to give you a heads up. I heard from Richard Blackwood today. Michael wants to meet tomorrow to discuss a possible settlement." Sarah sat up straighter. "What kind of settlement?" He didn't give details, but Blackwood seemed surprised by his client's change of direction. Apparently, Michael has been doing some serious thinking since the trial ended. They agreed to meet the following afternoon at Jennifer's office. Sarah spent the rest of the evening wondering what Michael might propose, and whether his apparent change of heart was genuine or another legal maneuver. The next day brought an unexpected visitor to Sarah's office. Captain Reynolds, her commanding officer, appeared shortly before lunch with news that would complicate her decision-making even further. "I'll get straight to the point, Commander," Captain Reynolds said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "We've got a situation developing in Somalia that requires your specific expertise. The mission would deploy in 6 weeks and last approximately 4 months. Sarah's stomach dropped. A deployment to Somalia would be exactly the kind of evidence Michael's lawyers would use to argue that her military career remained incompatible with stable parenting. "Sir, I should mention that I'm still waiting for a custody ruling. The timing couldn't be worse." Captain Reynolds nodded grimly. "I'm aware of your situation, and believe me, if there was anyone else qualified to lead this mission, I wouldn't be asking. But we need someone with your linguistic skills and regional experience. American hostages are involved." The weight of the request settled on Sarah's shoulders. Somewhere in Somalia, American civilians were depending on a rescue mission that might not happen if she wasn't available to lead it. But accepting the deployment could cost her custody of Emma, undoing everything she had fought for in court. "How long do I have to decide?" 48 hours. I know it's not much time, but the situation is developing rapidly." After Captain Reynolds left, Sarah called Jennifer to explain the new complication. The timing was impossibly cruel. Just as Michael seemed willing to negotiate a better custody arrangement, her duty as a SEAL was pulling her back toward the exact kind of mission that had caused problems in the first place. "This doesn't necessarily change anything," Jennifer said, though her voice lacked conviction. "We're meeting with Michael this afternoon. Let's see what he's proposing before you make any decisions about Somalia." The afternoon meeting took place in Jennifer's conference room, with both legal teams present. Michael looked nervous and kept glancing at Sarah throughout the preliminary discussions. When Richard Blackwood finally outlined his client's proposal, Sarah could barely believe what she was hearing. "Mr. Morrison is prepared to agree to joint custody with a 50-50 time split," Blackwood announced. "He's also willing to modify his work schedule to accommodate Ms. Morrison's deployment requirements, ensuring that Emma maintains stability even when military duties require extended absences." Jennifer leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "What's the catch? Yesterday your client was arguing that military deployment schedules were harmful to children." Michael spoke for the first time, his voice steady but emotional. "The catch is that I finally realized I was fighting the wrong battle. I was so focused on winning custody that I forgot what was actually best for Emma. She loves her mother and she's proud of what Sarah does. Taking that away from her would hurt her more than helping her." He explained that he had spent the week since the trial talking to other divorced parents, reading about military families, and most importantly, really listening to what Emma was telling him. Her pride in her mother's service was genuine, and her ability to cope with deployment separations was stronger than he had given her credit for. "I still think Emma needs stability," Michael continued. "But I realized that stability doesn't have to mean eliminating all challenges from her life. It means having reliable support systems and knowing that both her parents love her unconditionally." Sarah studied her ex-husband's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But his demeanor seemed genuinely changed, as if he had spent the week questioning assumptions he had held for years. "What about the deployment schedules?" Sarah asked. "How would joint custody work when I'm overseas for months at a time?" "We modify the arrangement during deployments," Michael said. "Emma stays with me full-time while you're away, but you maintain all parental rights and decision-making authority. When you return, we go back to the normal 50-50 split." Jennifer took notes, while Richard Blackwood outlined the specific terms. The arrangement would require both parents to coordinate their work schedules, communicate regularly about Emma's needs, and put their daughter's interests ahead of their own convenience. "It's not going to be easy," Michael admitted. "But fighting each other isn't working for anyone, especially Emma. She needs both of us in her life, and she needs to see us working together instead of against each other." The meeting lasted 3 hours as they worked through the details of the proposed agreement. When it finally ended, Sarah felt emotionally drained but cautiously hopeful. If Michael was sincere about the arrangement, it would give Emma the stability she needed while allowing Sarah to continue her military career. But as she drove home that evening, Sarah's mind kept returning to the Somalia mission. Even with a custody agreement in place, accepting the deployment would test the new arrangement immediately. It would also send a message about her priorities that might influence future negotiations. Emma was waiting for her at the apartment, homework spread across the kitchen table, and a half-eaten apple beside her math worksheet. She looked up when Sarah entered, her face lighting up with the uncomplicated joy that only children can express. "Guess what, Mommy? Daddy says we might not have to choose who to live with anymore. He says maybe I can live with both of you just at different times." Sarah sat down beside her daughter, helping with the math problems while processing the implications of Emma's words. The 8-year-old had understood the custody negotiations better than the adults had given her credit for. "How would you feel about that arrangement?" Sarah asked carefully. Emma considered this while erasing a wrong answer. "I think it would be good. I'd miss whoever I wasn't with, but I'd know I'd see them soon, and you and Daddy wouldn't have to be mad at each other anymore." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah called Captain Reynolds to accept the Somalia deployment. The custody agreement would be tested immediately, but it was the right thing to do. American lives were at stake, and she had the skills needed to bring them home safely. She also filled out the Naval War College application and set it aside. Whether or not she submitted it would depend on how well the new custody arrangement worked, and whether Michael's change of heart proved genuine. For the first time in weeks, Sarah fell asleep feeling hopeful about the future. The road ahead would still be challenging, but perhaps there was a way to be both the mother Emma needed and the seal her country required. The final test of that balance was only 6 weeks away. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood on the tarmac at Naval Air Station Norfolk, her gear bag slung over her shoulder and her team assembled around her. The C-130 transport plane that would take them to Somalia sat ready, engines beginning their pre-flight warm-up. In 12 hours, she would be leading a hostage rescue mission in one of the most dangerous regions of Africa. But first, she had to say goodbye to Emma. The 8-year-old stood beside Michael at the edge of the tarmac, her small hand clasped in her father's. She wore her favorite blue dress and carried the stuffed dolphin that had become her constant companion during deployments. Her face was composed, but Sarah could see the effort it took to maintain that composure. "Remember what we practiced," Sarah said, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "What's the most important thing?" "That you're coming back," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "You always come back even when it takes a long time." "That's right, and what else?" "That I can be proud of you even when I miss you, and that missing someone doesn't mean loving them less." Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, memorizing the feel of Emma's arms around her neck and the scent of her strawberry shampoo. These moments never got easier, no matter how many deployments they had been through together. "I love you more than all the dolphins in the ocean," Sarah whispered, using their special phrase. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky," Emma whispered back, completing their ritual. Michael stepped forward as they separated, his expression serious but supportive. The changes in him over the past 6 weeks had been remarkable. The bitter, resentful ex-husband had been replaced by a co-parent who genuinely seemed committed to making their arrangement work. "We'll video call every Sunday at 1400 hours, Michael said, using military time with a slight smile. And I'll send daily updates about school and soccer practice. Sarah nodded, appreciating his effort to understand her world. Emergency contact protocols are in my folder on the kitchen counter, if anything happens. I know where to find you, Michael interrupted gently. Go save some lives, Sarah. We'll be here when you get back. The flight to Somalia took 18 hours with refueling stops, giving Sarah plenty of time to review mission parameters and prepare her team. The hostage situation involved 3 American aid workers who had been captured by al-Shabaab militants while delivering medical supplies to a refugee camp. Intelligence suggested they were being held in a compound near Mogadishu, but the information was 3 days old and potentially unreliable. Master Chief Thompson sat across from Sarah in the cargo bay, cleaning his rifle with the methodical precision of a man who had done this hundreds of times. The rest of the team was scattered throughout the aircraft, some sleeping, others reviewing maps and satellite imagery. You doing okay, Commander? Jake asked without looking up from his weapon. I know this deployment timing wasn't ideal. Sarah checked her own equipment for the 3rd time, a nervous habit that helped her focus before operations. It's what we do, Master Chief. Emma understands that sometimes duty calls at inconvenient times. She's a tough kid, takes after her mother. The team spent the first week in country conducting reconnaissance and refining their operational plan. The compound where the hostages were believed to be held was heavily defended and situated in a densely populated urban area. Any rescue attempt would require precision timing and minimal collateral damage. Sarah's linguistic skills proved valuable during the planning phase. Her ability to communicate with local sources provided intelligence that official channels couldn't access. Street vendors, taxi drivers, and market merchants shared observations about guard rotations and vehicle movements that helped build a complete picture of the target location. On the 8th day, they received confirmation that the hostages were still alive, but that their captors were growing increasingly agitated. Intelligence suggested that the militants were planning to move the prisoners to a more remote location within 48 hours. The rescue window was closing rapidly. The mission launched at 300 local time, under cover of darkness, and during the new moon phase that provided maximum concealment. Sarah led her team through the narrow streets of Mogadishu, using routes that had been carefully mapped to avoid known militant positions and civilian areas. The assault on the compound lasted exactly 17 minutes. Sarah's team neutralized 6 guards, breached 3 defensive positions, and extracted all 3 hostages without suffering casualties. The operation went so smoothly that it felt almost anticlimactic after weeks of preparation. But as they prepared to extract from the area, Sarah received urgent communication from their intelligence support. A large group of militants was moving toward their position, apparently alerted by the sound of gunfire. The planned extraction route was compromised. Change of plans, Sarah announced over her team's communication system. We're going to ground until the situation stabilizes. There's a safe house 6 blocks north of our current position. The safe house was a nondescript building in a residential neighborhood, maintained by local allies who supported American counterterrorism efforts. Sarah's team spent 2 days there while hostile forces searched the surrounding area, their presence gradually diminishing as other priorities demanded attention. During the 2nd night, while the hostages slept and her team maintained watch, Sarah found a moment to call home using encrypted satellite communication. It was Sunday evening in Somalia, which made it early afternoon on the east coast of the United States. Michael answered on the 2nd ring, his voice clear despite the distance and electronic interference. How are you doing? Are you safe? I can't give specifics, but we're fine. The mission is going well. How's Emma? Missing her mother, but coping like a champion. She scored another goal yesterday and asked me to tell you all about it. Sarah could hear Emma's voice in the background, excited and animated as she described her soccer game. The sound of her daughter's laughter across thousands of miles felt like a lifeline, connecting her to the reason she fought so hard to balance her dual roles as mother and warrior. Can I talk to her? Of course, Emma, your mom is on the phone. Mommy, Emma's voice came through clearly, filled with joy and energy. I missed you so much, Daddy-en.